Welcome, everybody. I am Shake Silikian. I am the consultant and the founder and owner of Shake Silikian Consulting. I work with nonprofit organizations with senior leadership and board members to elevate the organization to make the biggest impact that they can through executive search, learning and development efforts, and facilitation of various programs, including cohorts and groups of individuals, and facilitating strategic conversations within organizations. I am so excited for today's conversation. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Gayle Roberts to our conversation about tips and tricks for leveling up your nonprofit with AI. Gayle and I met through her work at Larkin Street. I was a volunteer at one of their events, one of their amazing events, and immediately hit it off with Gayle as a former fundraiser. Our conversation went very deep very quickly, and I connected with Gayle and really loved watching her over the last few years on how she's utilized AI and various tools and been on the front lines in the Bay Area on utilizing AI to elevate her organization's fundraising efforts, to streamline various efforts. I learned a lot from her as she was posting on LinkedIn about how she utilized the tools, and wanted to make sure that we had a conversation today. So Gayle, welcome. I am thrilled to have you joining us today. We'd love to know who's joining us. We are streaming on 3 different platforms. So welcome to folks who are joining us live. If you happen to watch this at a later point, we will keep an eye on the comments. So let us know, even if you're watching this afterwards, that where you're watching from, and ask questions. We will certainly make sure that we are facilitating those conversations as well. Gayle, thank you so much for your willingness to have this conversation. I wanted to ask you, what was it about AI that interested you, that you said, this is where we need to be? This is something that is not a fad or a trend that is going to pass, and that you're willing to embrace it and start learning yourself?
Um, that's a really great question, and I'll just add, thank you so much again for inviting me. I'm very, very flattered. Also a fangirl of yours as well.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
so my backstory is I've been doing fundraising in the Bay Area for almost 25 years, and I've helped lead a couple of the local trade associations and in several of the larger organizations. Most recently, as you said, I was the Chief Development Officer at Larkin Street Youth Services for the last 5 years. I rolled off that position in the summer. I'm semi-retired now, doing some consulting and coaching as well. And I see there's folks coming online from organizations I know of, like High Global and the Girls Inc. in Alameda. So hey, everybody. I think most people know AI is kind of a new thing on the horizon, but that's actually not true. It's been around for a long time. There's been people who've been thinking about this for over a century or more, and working on it for several decades. But generative AI, the thing that we are most familiar with these days of, say, ChatGPT or Claude from Anthropic or Gemini from Google, they were released a couple of years ago and have been kind of a game changer in kind of public awareness, but also the power of AI, particularly around generative AI for creating text or images or sound or other things that are coming down the pipeline. But there's also other kinds of AI systems, including predictive or analytical AI, that look at your data from maybe your database or other systems and look at historical trends to help you analyze data and also look forward to the future. So that's kind of the backstory. And when I was at Larkin Street, I had a team of 12 people, but I always felt short-staffed because every year there was another $1 million on the budget goal. And so I was looking at technology solutions to try to stretch, further. And a couple of years ago, I discovered this thing called Raise from Gravity, which is a very high-end predictive analytics system. It looks into your major donor pool. it looks into your predictive analytics system, like for wealth screening, like we used iWave, but there are other
Mhm.
ones. And then it also looked at some other metrics. And every day it would give me a recommendation of who to reach out to and actually pre-write the emails. And had other volunteers on that. Um, you know, in hindsight, it was probably a little overdue for what we had. It was really designed more for large institutions like colleges or hospitals that had the staffing to really manage that system. But I didn't have a major gifts officer, and I didn't have the technical staff online to, build our own kind of moves management system that was really effective. So I went for the software solution, and it did help us. And it got me more used to using AI, I think, perhaps maybe so as some of my peers. So when ChatGPT came out, I jumped on that, and I used it for everything. My morning journal pages, um, to project planning, to grant writing, to LOIs, and anything I could for content creation. And I found it a game changer because it helped me accelerate the process of creating all those kinds of materials. So that's how we got started into it. And over the years, somehow, because I started maybe before a few other people like you called me to ask me about my experience. I like to say I'm a test case of one, but I have lots of opinions.
Well, thank you for sharing that and letting us know your start. And I agree, the chat GPTs, the Geminis in the universe exposed us to the generative piece. But as a longtime fundraiser and nonprofit executive in larger institutions, we've been using AI in other ways, right? And the
Yeah,
analytics piece and predictive pieces and building models, etc. So I think we use the term AI to mean so many different things
that's right.
that
Yes.
it's also very different. I do feel that it's important for the nonprofit sector to realize, at least in my opinion, that we've been slow to utilize tools, technology tools in the past, and this is an opportunity for us to be in the forefront in utilizing the tools and in helping to think about the ethical considerations around the tools and the social considerations, right? I think a lot of people are very much afraid of losing their jobs to the robot overlords. I think that's not going to happen in anywhere in my lifetime. I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong, and I should be, nicer to robot overlords. But I do feel there is a real consideration for streamlining that could cost people jobs. So, how have you thought about it? And as you've utilized it more, what are your thoughts around the ethical components of it and making sure that we're utilizing it ethically? Because, I mean, very recently I was listening to a podcast. It's a parenting podcast, and they tried using ChatGPT to say, write a weekly chore schedule for a family of four. And it came back with mom does cooking and dishes.
Yeah.
Dad goes outside and plays with the dog. And it's like, wait, what? But the model is based on some bias in our world, unfortunately, right? So, how do we think about that from an ethical perspective as we're using some of the tools?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the risks are at several different levels. And, at the highest level, there's a lot of concerns about um, AI being used unethically, risks to national security or other kinds of things like that. Um, I think that, there are serious concerns, and the best thing we can do is to work through national organizations and leverage and talk to our representatives. Individually and organizationally, I think the best thing we can do to protect ourselves and to move forward and to serve our communities is to become AI literate. So, talking about the question where you said the AI came back with biased questions, biased responses to, how to set up the workload. Yeah, it's based on kind of the whole World Wide Web and the knowledge that it can scrape off the internet and other things, and so it has the same biases that the cultural does. Um, so what you need to do, just as if you're working for, say, a progressive nonprofit and you want to have a DEI lens on everything, you set guidelines for it to evaluate the world through that DEI lens. And if you're using, say, ChatGPT, you can actually go into what are called instruction sets and give it permanent instructions that share with it what your values are and what your desires are. Um, and the other thing is when just working with any of these generative AI systems, never recommend taking the first response. Um, and you can always edit and do revisions. But even more than that is learning how to prompt the systems. Um, I don't know what you asked for it specifically when you got that feedback, but how you ask the question makes a lot of difference on what the response is. You can change the wording just slightly and get very different responses. So you actually need to tell it what your biases are and what specifically you're looking for and kind of the outcome. Um, yeah.
Thank you for that. And that was on a parenting podcast, so I don't know what the prompt was
Mhm.
that they asked for. And I agree with you, having played with Gemini and ChatGPT quite a bit. You can also ask one word difference gets you a different result,
Exactly.
right? As George Perez in the comments has said, you have to feed AI the right information to get the right outcomes. Bias is everywhere. I love that you mentioned don't take the first draft, right? I think you can continue to ask it to evolve things. I think a lot of people don't realize that you can continue to iterate with it. Um, Somebody had mentioned at a recent conference, think of the AI tools, especially the generative ones, as an intern, right? You can
Mhm.
keep asking, oh, that was a good start. Less of this, more of this, and that back and forth conversation, which is very counterintuitive to how we've utilized the search feature in Google or any other type of search engine, right? So I think this conversational piece. Um, I appreciate that feedback, the different levels. I'm also curious just to pivot to the practical piece of it. Talk to me a little bit. You mentioned a few of the tools that you've utilized, some that are low cost that you think is worthwhile for nonprofits that have very teeny budgets, right? It's like, I want every dollar spent has to have great impact and bring back multiples. What
Right.
are some of the tools that you would recommend, low cost ones that, in your opinion, again, this is a conversation of one on one, right? A case of one, have worked well for you.
Well, all the generative AI models, the leading ones, have free platforms that are quite powerful these days. They're much better than the ones that came out 2 years ago. And if people on the line don't know about TechSoup, you should bookmark that. It's a nonprofit that provides discounted software to other nonprofits. They get licensing. And particularly if you're a small nonprofit, often you can get 40% off or maybe even free on different software packages. So that's a go-to place. But there are things, the generative AI, for example, they're getting better at math, but they're not really analytical in that way. So there's things like Tableau, which is a software platform that's really good at math and kind of doing the numbers, and that's AI enabled. That's available, I think, for like free for like small nonprofits. So that's a system. There are other ones like Domo, which are similar in that area. Um, most of CRMs these days, the newer models are becoming AI enabled in some ways. I like Bloomerang for smaller to mid-sized nonprofits. You can start doing predictive kind of like not just gift processing, but who do you think might give, more in that. Blackbaud obviously is a big leading platform. Salesforce has their CRM, which if you're a high-end, large nonprofit, you might want to consider it. We had it at Larkin, and it's a beast. You can get it for free, but you're going to have to spend a lot on programming it. But they have a lot of AI enabled kind of plugins or apps within that now that are quite powerful. So, all of the kind of the software suite that you use, whether it's like HubSpot for marketing, has a lot of kind of smart technology built into it these days. So,
Mhm.
and the good thing about those is you can't help but use the technology. It's kind of built into it. The generative AI programs, I found that maybe 20% of your team will really dive into them, 20% will be resistant, and the rest will be kind of in the middle waiting for you to lead. Um, but if your CRM is AI enabled, they'll be using it all the time. So yeah.
I love that. And mm, I know what AI enabled means. Do you want to define it for anybody who might not realize what it means?
Um, So, let's say you want to do some financial modeling, looking at a group of donors and trying to figure out who's going to give how much. The AI-enabled systems can help you that. They can rank them. They can give you gift estimates, what to ask for based on not only the history of what they've been giving to your organization, but to other organizations. So you can do this kinds of modeling with just about, whether it's your bookkeeping system and you're trying to look at what your expenses are going to be, um, and the systems can help you, particularly with the marketing. So, like, you send out an email, the systems can tell whether it's read or opened or ignored, and then depending on what the response is, it can send out different emails after that, and then a different email after that, and it can personalize it based on what the donor's profile or the person in your database is. And so you can really be very specific in your outreach and have that follow-up be automated. It's not just like you're sending out one mass email to the whole list anymore.
Yeah. Um, a few years ago, I was actually participating. I was selected as a judge for DECA, which is an entrepreneurial high school competition in the Bay Area. And I was asked to um, be the judge for the
Mhm.
finance related projects. And every single one of the teams, I had about 25, I think, kiddos that I talked to, every single one of them talked about hyper personalization. So all the young people are expecting that level of hyper personalization, right? That the message I get um, from XYZ organization is different than the message Gail gets because of our different preferences, right? You're in San Francisco, I'm in the East Bay. So inviting me to something tomorrow night in San Francisco might not be the best thing, but inviting me to something in, let's say, Dublin tomorrow night might be a better option, right? Knowing those types of nuances about each of the individuals. So, talk to me just a little bit about the messaging. Did your team have to create the follow up messaging, or was it a collaborative effort, right, with the AI enabled tools to say this type of message would resonate with this group? The waterfall campaigns, were
Mhm,
they
mhm.
essentially AI recommended and you tweaked it, or vice versa?
Well, I wish I had my old marketing team online. I had two people who are very talented who manage that process. And I guess the answer is yes and.
Mm,
Um, so, there's different kinds of marketing. Print is still strong. You should be still sending out urine appeals in print because, we all get junk, but you get a real letter that stands out these days. But there's a lot of email marketing, obviously, and then social media as well. Those are kind of two distinct things. And I talked a little bit about email marketing, how um, you can use, say, generative AI to help you write your appeal, and then use some of the smart email listservs like HubSpot or others like that to craft certain waterfall, as you
mhm.
mentioned. We would have like a 6-week campaign toward the end of the year with different messages going out that kind of reinforced each other. And depending on the open rates, what people would get, which kind of part of those messages. And the system would help us, design that. For social media, it's the same thing. They can tell like how many views it gets, what's the best time of day, what's the best day of the week to put things out. And over time, it learns your audience, and so it becomes smarter, and it knows which appeals work more. So can learn from that, and then customize things to get it even more pinpointed to your specific audience, whoever you're trying to reach. You know, I think obviously we know like things like people are more online in the morning, checking their social media and stuff. But depending on who your audience are, you might, like, is it really that day on that afternoon at that time? You can find out from the metrics.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm mindful of our time and I have a billion questions, but I also want to invite our audience to put in some of their questions in any of the chat features so Gayle can answer them as well. I do want to let you know that there is about a 20-second delay. So if we don't read out your question quickly, it could be related to that. Gayle, are there any lessons learned as you think about this journey that you have been on for somebody just starting out now? They have not evolved with generative AI and the different AI enabled tools. What would you say would be something they should keep in mind?
Yeah. My big message really is it's not a technology challenge, it's a people challenge. Um, the software is available, and the worst AI is the AI that you use today. It's all getting better. There's some things in the news recently that some of the development is a little slowing down. There's what we call scaling laws, which people thought it was always going to get rapidly better. In the last couple of weeks in the news, it's like maybe it's got a plateau.
Mm.
But AI is here to stay, and whether it's 2 years or 20 years, there's going to be advancements. Um, but the challenge is actually workplace culture, the resistance to AI, some of the reasonable fears around AI, whether it's the larger issues of just false information being spread around the world, or perhaps losing their job internally. So you need to, as a leader of an organization, uh, do your homework and do a lot of active listening, and also figure out who within the organization are the kind of the decision points, who can be influencers, who can be a leader and be part of a internal, say, work group, to create, say, a starter example program, something very small that you can test internally with maybe a small work group. Back at Larkin Street, my previous job, my development team was the group that was getting access to AI ahead of other groups. Because frankly, in nonprofits, the development team is the one that can leverage it the most effectively. We can see the biggest ROI because we're the money raisers, and a little bit of AI can help you raise more money. Then next, I would say on the finance team, because you can help save some money that way. So, start small, make sure you have executive leadership buy-in, find your influencers within your organization, address concerns and complaints, and move forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, Uh, Thank you, Jerry, for your comments. Jerry in the chat has indicated that they have used ChatGPT a lot for upfront editing ideas and incorporating more interesting language. And as they've listened to you, Gayle, talk about the broad scope of tools, they're wondering if there is a list somewhere of the best tools. Do you have recommendations for places people can look for a list, or how to engineer the prompt to chat
Yeah.
gpt to come up with the tools?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, for nonprofit software purchases, the first place everybody should always go is to TechSoup, because you can often get discounted software through there. So that's a good place to look. And they have different categories of software, not always all AI enabled, but some of them are. Fundraising.ai is a good website resource. I've done a couple of trainings through them. They're backed by Donor Search. So they're a little, uh, more toward donor search, which is a CRM platform, but they also have other resources there, and it's very, very useful. A lot of webinars that have been recorded that are up there, and I highly recommend them. So those are two good sources. And yeah, you can ask the AI, um, what are some good tools, and you can take a look at those as well.
Let's talk a little more, maybe use that as an example of prompt engineering, because I think there is a huge science around it, right? That
Mhm.
it's not if you ask the question and the prompt and the generative AI piece the same way you do in a search, you don't get great results. So, any tips around prompt engineering for Gen AI pieces?
Yeah, I do. So there's the new AI that's coming out, particularly like I said, I use OpenAI, ChatGPT most. They have a new version out, the OI, that's it thinks longer and it has a little bit different background. But the best practices basically are give it a role, give it a goal, and give it expectations. So a role, what I mean is tell it who it is. Um, maybe you are the chief development officer for XYZ organization. So it takes on a persona, so to say.
Mhm.
Or maybe you're a funder review and you wanted to look at your grant proposal previously, or you're um, somebody trying to create a work plan for for your household, right? Um, and then you tell it the goal. What do you want it to actually do for you? Maybe a 1 or 2 sentence goal statement, and then some expectations. Like, here are the restrictions that I want you to keep within. I want to have these certain kinds of things. I want you to follow DEI best practices. I want a budget that is within guidelines that I can maintain. I want something that's very specific and detailed, or I want a more summary kind of thing. So that role, the goal, and the expectations is always a good kind of structure for a prompt. Um, but here's the thing: you can actually ask the generative AI to rewrite your prompts to a best practices. So often when I'm moving really fast, I write something quickly and then I say, rewrite this to your best practices, and then I look at it and it usually will be more detailed, and then I say go do that. I actually have within my instruction sets in my GPT best practices for prompt building, so it always has that in its memory, so it helps me. But it'll do that one way or the other. um, so those are some of the tips I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we're coming up on time, and I want to be respectful of people's times. I continue to learn from you, so thank you, thank you, thank you for being so willing to share your learning and your journey publicly. I think oftentimes we're hesitant to put ourselves out there doing something new, being a trailblazer in an industry. You are definitely a trailblazer, and it's important for the rest of us to learn how to utilize the AI, but also when we are trying something new, how to share that broadly and widely with others, right? And sharing that. I love the nonprofit sector and have chosen that sector for my career because we're so open with sharing. And so I thank you for this. Any final words of advice or wisdom
Yeah.
or cautionary words, anything that you wanted to share with the audience before we say goodbye?
I would say if you haven't yet explored generative AI, give yourself 10 hours. And just practice with it and ask it lots of different questions and try different things. There is a learning curve, but it's pretty short. I think 10 hours, you'll get to be very proficient at it. If you're concerned about confidential information, you can always anonymize, say, donor lists before you put it in, or you can purchase one of the higher premium levels, which will provide you confidentiality. Um, there's an enterprise level version that you can get for like 150 seats or more. That's HIPAA compliant. But even the 2 seat version, I think they call it the Pro, I can't remember, with ChatGPT, they don't train on your data. so they don't keep it in its memory. So the free version, they do train on your data. They do keep it in the memory somehow. So these are things to be, aware of when it comes to confidentiality, privacy, and use cases. But I would just say the best time to get started is now. Don't freak out about like if you feel like you're behind the curve. To be honest, the nonprofit sector, we're undercapitalized. We're going to be behind the curve in integrating these new technologies. We have time to learn these things, and we have time to advocate for best practices within our field. And I'm really happy for this conversation.
Thank you so much. Really happy for this conversation as well. Thanks to everybody who tuned in to listen to us on one of the three platforms. Thank you, Jerry, for the very kind note. What an awesome note. Thanks for a great lunch for us as well. I wish you all the best and look forward to future conversations with other professionals and other topics. Take good care.